Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Laundromat Millionaire Show, sponsored by HM Company Drain Troughs at draintroughs.com. Today's episode is just Dave and I, and we are going to be talking about a subject that often comes up in his coaching calls and in our members-only Q&As, and that is store layout. We're going to be talking about machine mix, aisle size, whether to have a kids area or not, and advice for it, and much, much more. So definitely stay tuned to hear all of that.
Yeah, for sure. But before we get into that episode, we just want to spotlight. We just finished, Carla, our 9th pickup and delivery workshop here in Cincinnati. If you didn't know, we do these 2-day intensive workshops in person here in Cincinnati. They're small, intimate workshops teaching you how to launch, scale, and optimize your wash, dry, fold, and your pickup and delivery business. And we just finished our 9th one, and we've now had a couple days to recover from it. Man, those things are a lot of fun. They're a lot of work. They're super intense, but there's also a lot of good networking and meeting a lot of great people. So the reason we bring that up is we just finished that one, and we're going to turn around in 9 weeks in May of 2025 and have our second workshop of the year. And then our third will be later this year after the clean show. So we'd love for you to think about joining. Take a look on our website at laundromatmillionaire.com. Click on the education tab, drop down that, and click on the workshop page and take a look and see what our workshop is all about.
So let's go ahead and get started into store layout.
Say it's kind of more of an art than a science, but you want to take into consideration what do your competitors have. I like to do everything I can in my business model within my budget to be able to differentiate myself. I call it making myself uncompetable. I mean, we've served millions of customers at this point, not to mention our coaching, and I can tell you that these nuances matter tremendously.
All right, so today is all about store layout. Now, we realize that everyone has different challenges when you're laying out a store, especially if you are doing a refit. And we now have done 5 zombie mats turned into beautiful laundromats. We've had various sizes. So our smallest is how many?
Well, our smallest today is 2,400 square foot, but we actually had a store that before we expanded it was about 1,500 square feet. So we've had them as small as 1,500 square feet, and our largest, what we call super store today, is 9,000 square feet.
So we've had all kinds of size constraints. We've also had all kinds of budget constraints.
For sure.
We started with hardly anything, and we're struggling to put in any new equipment, much less a full retool. So we've had the challenges, but we want to talk today about when you're making those choices, what choices are optimal for your customer experience, and where you want to focus is that throughput. Dave often talks about throughput. What do you mean when you say throughput?
Yeah, the quick version of it, because we want to get into the meat potatoes of the episode, but the quick version is just the customer's ease of ability or their overall customer experience from the time they pull in the parking lot until the time they leave the parking lot. How easy it is to get them into the store. So like automatic doors, wide doors, things of that nature, wide parking spots, lots of parking spots, ramps that go up to your sidewalk, things of that nature. And then once you get inside the store, it's the ability to get them to the washer department and get their laundry started as quickly as possible and as comfortably as possible. And then while they're waiting on the washers, their comfort when it comes to seating units, and do you have workstations with plugs and things like that that allow them to get work done while they're waiting on the washer, and then your ability to do the same over to the dryer department, and then making sure you have plenty of folding tables at the right height and at the right trajectory relative to your dryers, and then your ability to once again get them out of the store, and even the egress and ingress to and from your parking lot are part of that overall customer experience. And I learned years ago that our industry kind of just doesn't focus on this. So I've started talking about it a whole lot to try to get people's attention. Manufacturers, distributors, other coaches and consultants like myself, and even just individual laundromat owners, because, I think about it, Carla, and I think a small store costs $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 to build, and a large store can be $2-3 million, sometimes more in some cases. And it's just amazing to me that we spend all this time and energy and won't take 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes or even hours to really take the consideration of the customer experience. A lot of times, especially newbie owners, They get together with a distributor. The distributor says to buy this and put these here, and they just say, okay, and they do. And, good distributors, bad distributors, both of them exist in the world. But even good distributors sometimes, miss things and they miss details. They don't think about things, especially if they don't own and operate laundromats on a day-to-day basis.
So what I'm really taking from what you're saying, when you talk about throughput, it's really about being comfortable.
Yeah.
Especially us as Americans are kind of known for having like big bubbles. We don't like people in our space.
Well, and honestly, Carla, more so, we've always been that way to a certain extent, but more so post-COVID. Mm-hmm. So we're more sensitive to our, area around us and don't get too close to me kind of thing than ever before when it comes to germs and things like that.
So that's going to affect throughput even more because if you want people to be able to comfortably move through your store, it doesn't matter how many machines you have or whatever if they can't get to those machines because you don't have the proper aisle size. Another thing, and we will talk about aisle size in a second, but another thing about what you were saying with throughput is also making space for things like seating and folding tables. I hear you say all the time when you're working with different clients about how more washers does not mean more revenue necessarily. Yeah. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually pretty simple. It's not a complicated thing, but it's just something you don't hear people talking about because, to be honest with you, there's more money to be made in the industry from manufacturers, distributors, places like that by selling more equipment. So, I mean, they move metal and that's how they feed their babies and make money. But the truth is that doesn't necessarily mean it's a more viable, better ROI for the owner themselves. And that's really what we focus on here at Laundromat Millionaire. So, yeah, what I tell people as a general rule is there's kind of this misnomer in the industry that more equipment equals more revenue. And it's just not true. It's completely foolhardy. The truth is that more happy customers equals more revenue, right? And you can even have higher prices. You can have 30 turns per day, but if you're charging $1 for a 60-pound machine, how relevant is that? And there are many cases throughout the United States and even in other countries where, people are charging $6 for 60-pound machines, and we're over here charging 12, right? As an example. And it's like, okay, well, you might have double the turns per day that I have, but I have the same amount of revenue, and my margins are a lot higher because I actually don't have to serve twice as many customers.
Well,
so
unless wear on the machines as well.
Well, for sure. The machines last longer. I mean, and once again, there's a tipping point. I'm not suggesting that we try to get to $40 a washer or anything like that. I mean, we're here to serve the community. But there is a tipping point here where I think we as an industry have just left an awful lot of meat on the bone. And I think a lot of it has been at the expense of we haven't done it. This is in the past. We're better at it today in 2025, but laundromat owners haven't done enough networking and educating and calling on good consultants and mentors and things like that. And the manufacturers and distributors, once again, just collectively, a lot of them are amazing people who really want you to be successful. But at the end of the day, they make their money by selling washers and dryers. So their job is to do that. And even if it's kind of a jaded approach, so to speak, meaning, it's subconscious, they don't even really realize that in their mind, they're justifying selling you an extra 2, 4, 6, 10 washers when you don't really need them. Also keep in mind, most manufacturers, employees, and even distributors don't actually run laundromats. And so they're just parroting a lot of information that they hear from other places. And so they could have really good hearts and really good intentions. And the truth is that a rockstar distributor is one of your most valuable assets in the industry. So I'm not here to put them down by any stretch of the imagination. But I want laundromat owners to be more educated. That's why we launched this platform. That's why our goal of elevating the industry is if all of our businesses are more healthy and more profitable, then by default, the manufacturers will grow and elevate, and so will the distributors, and everyone will win.
I want to tie that back to, as you talk about the number of machines and stuff like that, it all comes back to throughput. You even talked about charging higher prices. And I mean, we're the price leader. We have the highest prices in our area, but we're also the busiest laundromats. And the difference is not all customers want to come to us because we're not the cheapest, but the customers that value that proper throughput, because throughput is about making the customer comfortable. They can easily move around your store and be comfortable doing their laundry. They can comfortably sit in, comfortable chairs. I feel like I keep saying the word comfortable, but it's all about that. And they're willing to pay a premium price for that premium experience. And that's what it all comes back to.
It sounds silly, Carla, but I mean, the difference in a 3-foot wide folding table and a 6-foot wide folding table, the difference in having, anti-fatigue mats for your customers to stand on while they stand for 3 hours and fold laundry versus not. A lot of these things are small things, but they actually add tremendously to your overall value proposition. So
whether you already have a laundromat or are looking to get into the laundry industry, everyone needs proper drainage. We use HM Company drain troughs. Their drain troughs were first created in 1991, and they have been the leading drain trough manufacturer ever since. They're made in the USA, and their drain troughs are fully customizable to meet your needs. That's why we've used them ever since entering the industry. They're easy to clean for our staff and plenty sturdy when we need to walk on them when servicing our washers. With the ability to span up to 25 feet, our troughs rarely need to be connected together, creating an easy installation. Want to slope your trough like we do? No problem. Just let the experts at HM Company know. For more information, go to their website at draintroughs.com. That is draintroughs.com. HM Company Drain Troughs. They've been leading the industry since 1991. Check them out today. Before we get into equipment mix, part of that being comfortable and getting proper throughput that often comes up is aisle size. Now, as I mentioned, we have various size laundromats. We currently have 4 laundromats, and our biggest store has 12-foot aisles, but our smallest store at places has
3-foot aisles.
Does it have 3 foot? Oh,
yeah,
wow.
at times. Yep.
So it varies. Sometimes you have constraints that you just can't get around, but let's talk about ideal aisle size. What would you say is ideal what would you say is ideal aisle size?
Yeah, first of all, it depends, right, Carla? That's what I always say. So what does it depend on? It depends on the equipment mix, right? So if you have a front-load washer facing a front-load washer, then you're going to want like 3 to 4 feet for the customer on one side of the aisle to load their machine and camp out. You're going to want the customer on the opposite side to do the same, and then you're going to want to leave about 3 to 4 feet in the middle for somebody, what I call passersby, people to come through. You know, we don't want them to have to do what I call the elbow shuffle, which is where they kind of turn sideways and excuse me, pardon me. We'll do that if we have to, but that's not ideal. So what we're talking about here is ideal.
If doors open to each other, then you want ideally 9 to 12 feet to truly have your customers' true comfortability. That'd be ideal. So what about if
we're not here to, I just want to point out, we're not here to suggest that if you have 8 foot that you're a failure, right? It just means your business model isn't ideal, right? So let's get as close to that as we can.
So what about if you just have one door facing a wall on the other side?
Yep. Then you would want to take that other adjacent person, you know, the 3 foot on the other, 3 to 4 feet on the other side, and remove that. But you still want room for someone to camp out and load their washer and dryer with their kids and their carts and their strollers and all the things that they bring with them. And then you still want room for people to be able to pass by behind them to get to the machines before and after them.
Okay, so 6 feet. So 3 foot, 3 to 4 feet for the person, and then 3 to 4 feet for the passersby. So if you think of your laundromat in terms of on the busiest, Sunday afternoon, how many people possible would need to go through an area, and then say about 3 to 4 feet per person would be ideal.
Yep.
So kind of think of that as far as aisle size. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are all considerations, but I always use the front load washer facing front load washer because that's kind of the most egregious, right? Now, I know they're not as popular as they used to be, but let's take a top load washer. If you have a front load washer facing a top load washer, I always say you're not loading the washer from the front. So when you're loading from the front, you kind of take a step back and you crouch down and you're taking laundry and going like this. When you're loading from a top loader, you tend to kind of stand and hover over the machine. You'll still have things around you, but you can kind of cheat a foot or two if you have top loaders facing front loaders, as an example.
Well, and then also think about, you could have maybe a machine that faces someone, a folding table. Does it face where they would be standing on the folding table versus like the side of the folding table? Like you really have to think about where would your customers be and how much space do they need to feel comfortable in that space. Okay, so now let's go into machine mix. Now this is always, I know this is going to be a huge it depends because it depends so much on the size of your store and on the demographics and on that. But I know we often get questions about the mix of machines. How do you figure out what size machines you need for your market? And then after that, can we talk about where should you place stuff? Where should those machines be placed?
Yeah. One of the things that's important to understand when you're going to either do a retrofit project or even a new construction project it's really important to understand your demographics. It's really important to understand who your ideal avatar is and your business model. I actually start with those things with coaching clients, and that can take several hours and sometimes multiple phone calls before we kind of settle in on who they want to be when they grow up and what do you want to look like. And then you back into the things like the equipment mix and things like that. Now, the reason I don't like it when people just say in Facebook groups and stuff, demographics is everything. Well, just because your demographics lean one direction doesn't mean your business model is catering to that same ideal demographic, right? Okay. I'm not here to tell you who to focus on or who not to focus on. That's your business model and your decision. But you might have a bunch of low-income single people, right, as an example, and you may say, well, that's not who my business model is going to serve. Mine is going to serve families. Okay, well, you can certainly do that. I'm not here to tell you that those families don't exist in every community. So it's a combination of what are the strong demographics in your area, what's your ideal avatar, and that's really where you're going to start, because you really tend to focus more towards either families or not families, right? Mm-hmm. By the way, I want to point something out in this episode. One of the biggest misnomers in our industry is the only people that use laundromats are poor people. And the only thing poor people care about is price. Mm-hmm. And poor people only rent apartments that are low income, Section 8, things like that, and they don't have any disposable income. And while that demographic absolutely exists in the world, I would argue that that's less than 20% of our revenue for our 4 stores.
I'm going to add on to that. I think it's also a misconception that only people that don't have washers and dryers use our stores. For sure. Because I know we have various friends that will use our stores, and they come because there's, of course, when their washer or dryer goes out. Yep. But even when their washer or dryer is working, because they get behind on laundry and they just want to knock it out in a couple of hours using a bunch of machines rather than waste their whole weekend doing laundry. Yep. Or big items like king-size comforters and pet beds and things like that. So there's a lot of customers that come to our laundromats that have laundry facilities at their house. So I think that's another misconception I want to bring in. For sure.
And more so in the suburbs than anywhere else. But you would know if your community, is going to cater and swing more in that direction. And if your community doesn't have those kind of people, then it's going to be awful tough to get them to come to your store. As a general rule, 3 to 5 mile radius around your store is kind of your target market. So, I mean, if they're 20 miles out, the odds that you're going to pull them to your store are pretty slim with a self-serve model. So those are all things to consider. But what I always tell people is once you figured out your business model, and by the way, a part of your business model isn't just self-serve. A part of your business model more and more every day is what we call that full service laundry center, right? Which is drop off laundry, drop off dry cleaning, pick up and delivery. And when you're building out a store, you're going to build it to serve the local community from a self-serve perspective. But you also want to build it with those other things in mind, especially if they're going to be substantial parts of your revenue stream. If they're just going to be ancillary, you're going to do 500 pounds a week of drop off or whatever, 500 pounds of pickup and delivery or whatever. Okay, that may not be enough to move the needle. You're like, we'll just figure it out. But when you're looking at building substantial revenue streams, we generate more revenue from our pickup and delivery business than we do from our self-serve revenue. And so when you build a business model, especially now in 2025, if you're planning on building with a certain business model in mind, you may want to build that thinking about even the throughput of your productivity of your third shift production crew or even your second shift production crew. And the beauty is whether you have a second shift processor doing laundry on the floor, third shift processors with 9 of them doing them around each other, or a combination of both of those things with self-serve customers. The rules when it comes to aisle widths and demographics and things like that, those all kinds of apply.
So you talked about how demographics affect your machine mix, but I think I can figure out, okay, so if we have a lot of single people as our ideal avatar, then we're going to go with maybe some smaller size machines. If we have a lot of families, bigger families, we're going to go with bigger type machines. But what do you mean by if I also have wash, dry, fold, drop off, pick up and delivery, whatever you want to call it, because there's so many different names for it now. How does that affect my machine mix?
Well, the only thing I mean by that is, once again, your ideal avatar for even pick up and delivery. What we've learned is self-serve customers bring in less laundry per customer than drop off laundry customers. Pick up and delivery brings in the most. And so if your business model, and this takes kind of a veteran coach or a veteran owner to kind of, reverse engineer these things, but you're just going to kind of want, it's usually not a big swing, 10, 20%. You're going to want to lean in one direction or another. But for the sake of this episode, let's just go with the norm nowadays, which is most laundromats are built to cater to all these self-serve clienteles. Most of them want to do drop-off laundry in some way, shape, or form and pick up and delivery, but a lot of people don't know the real opportunity there. So let's not talk about the $1 million pickup and delivery business, and let's just bring it in a little bit more. But one of the things I like to point out to people is the ideal customer for most retail laundromats is the family. I want to point out something though. Even in that environment, a lot of people, I get on coaching calls all the time, seems like in the last 2 or 3 years, with people that are just like, I don't want a machine in my store under 40 pounds. And I want to point something out to people. With that as your ideal avatar and your demographics and such, I still like to see about 50% of my machines below 40-pound machines.
50%?
Yeah.
Half of them. Wow.
So I like about 50% of machines 40 pounds and up, and about 50% below that. And
Why?
The reason why is a couple things, but the most important one, obviously there's the obvious one, which some people just don't bring in a lot of laundry, right? But the reason why is because even when people bring in a lot of laundry, let's say you bring in 80 pounds of laundry, they don't typically just put it in one 80-pound machine. Yes, some people do, but that's not your average customer. They usually will load it in a 40 or a 60 and then have a smaller load, right?
So like their delicates or
correct.
maybe a small load of whites or
Correct.
something like that, or just that one comforter or whatever.
Yep, that's exactly right. And so do you think they want to take that smaller 15 pounds of whites or delicates or whatever and throw them in a 60-pound machine because that's the only machine you have in your store? Maybe you have 540s, but they're all being used? No. So what we've learned is that if you don't have at least 50% of your machines below 40 pounds, which by the way, let me point out, below 40 pounds could be a 35-pound Milner. For anybody that knows, that's a very large machine, right? Even a 30-pound Hips or Speed Queen machine is a fairly, we call them triple loaders. Mm-hmm. It's 3 loads of laundry. That's not exactly.
40 pounds is not a little bit of laundry.
No, for sure. So I just want to point out, below 40 pounds doesn't mean necessarily jumping right to top loaders. Mm-hmm. It can be top loaders, it can be 20s, you can even be 25-pound machines, which are common nowadays, 30 and 35-pound machines, a combination of all those things. And those aren't all necessary. Even a double loader, a 20-pound machine, isn't necessarily all that small. So I just like to point that out to people because a lot of people are not thinking about that. And then another part of it is you get those same type of laundry orders when it comes to drop off and pick up and delivery. They might send in 60 pounds, but you might have 15 pounds of whites that they want bleached, right? And you're not going to want to throw that from a productivity standpoint. You're not going to want to throw that in a 50 or 60-pound machine. You're going to want to have some smaller machines. So this is just a general rule, but once again, the average laundromat that's focusing on the families and wants to do some drop off and some pickup and delivery, I recommend as a general rule of thumb that you're going to want to have about 50% of your machines above 40 pounds and about 50% of them under 40 pounds.
Okay, so for that above 40,
Yep.
Should you go for the 80s or the 100s that everyone's talking about? Like what size, how many of each one? I guess it depends on the size of your store. What would you recommend there?
Yeah, it does. I can't give you an exact science because it does depend on the size of your store. It also depends on your competitive analysis. When you're doing competitive analysis, look at your competitors and who's their ideal avatar and who are they looking to serve. And then try to differentiate yourselves, right? If you have a competitor that has a lot of families coming in and they have 6 60-pound machines, you're going to benefit tremendously by having 2 or even 4 80-pound machines. Even 100-pound machines are becoming pretty popular nowadays. But you don't want to have a bunch of 100-pound machines and then a bunch of 60-pound machines. There's a big difference in the two. So if you're going to put a few hundreds in, you're going to want a few 80s in, and you're going to want to kind of what I call stair step them. And if you have a 2,000 square foot store, the odd that you have enough room for that many different size machines isn't always going to be ideal. So that's why I say it's kind of more of an art than a science, but you want to take into consideration what do your competitors have, and if you're kind of right on the edge of, well, maybe I need 80s, maybe I don't, there's 2 trains of thought there. One of them is my competitors have 80-pound machines, and when I did my research, I noticed they're always busy. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, maybe I want 4 instead of 2. Some people look at it the other way and say, my competitor doesn't have any 80-pound machines, so I don't need them either. Well, that's a train of thought, right? And another train of thought is they don't have any 80-pound machines. So imagine how much of a differentiator it's going to be for you that you have something they don't have. You can now market and advertise. I have the largest machines in Hamilton County, right? Or whatever. So it depends on your, what kind of tickles your fancy, so to speak, but how you want to approach that. But I like to do everything I can in my business model within my budget to be able to differentiate myself. I call it making myself uncompetable. Maybe your competitor doesn't have anything above a 60 right now, so you put some 80s in. But what if you didn't put 80s in because they didn't have them, and 6 months from now they put 80 pounds in? Well, you just bought this equipment that's going to last you 20 or 25 years. You're probably not going to get rid of some of your 60s and slip a couple 80s in. What you're going to do is you're just going to regret for the next 20 years, right? So these are the type of decisions that we like to make. But when it comes to modernized laundromats, I've found that 80-pound machines are one of the most popular size machines out there. Doesn't mean you need 20 of them. Yeah, for sure. As a general rule of thumb, and you can take this for what it's worth, but anywhere from a 2,000 to 4,000 square foot store, I like to have a minimum of 2 80-pound machines, and anything above a 4,000 square foot store, I like to have four 80-pound machines. Once again, not an exact rule of science, kind of a floor, if you will. But I like to use that as kind of a rule of thought too. And then from there, you're going to reverse engineer. Okay, if I'm going to have families, I'm going to have 2 or 4 80-pound machines. You usually want about 2 more of the next size down. So if I'm going to have 2 80s, I want 4 60s. If I'm going to have 4 80s, I want 6 60s. As a general rule. And then as far as just strictly numbers in a modernized laundromat today, as a general rule, we want as many 40-pound machines in our store as anything else. So like in our superstore, we have 4 80s, 6 60s, and then we have 10 40s. Right? Those middle of the roads.
Is that the most commonly used?
It is. It's the most common size, right?
Okay.
A lot of people talk about, and I kind of just said it, and hopefully I didn't confuse people, but the most popular size machine is 80-pound machines. Well, that's not necessarily true. We only have 2 of them, right? Or in our superstore, we have 4 of them.
People love them, though.
They love them, absolutely. But my point is, if you put 10 of them in the store, your turns per day wouldn't be that high because most people that come in don't have 80 pounds of laundry, right? Those are your feature machines. They're your most profitable machines. Doesn't necessarily mean that numbers-wise you need the most 80-pound machines.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
Is your laundromat ready to become the neighborhood's #1 choice? LaundroBoost has proven strategies to help your business flourish.
I think we saw changes pretty quick before that 4-month range. I'm in that 4-month range now, and we're seeing changes left and right. I mean, pickup and delivery clients, drop-off clients, self-service clients, businesses up as a whole.
Literally, it was shocking to watch the numbers jump. I wish I could go back and I could begin to track these things, which I have done, to see what percentage growth we had, but it wasn't unusual to go up 30% per month.
At LaundroBoost, we specialize in fueling laundromat growth. Through targeted Google ads and powerful social media campaigns, we make your location stand out and attract loyal customers. Ready to level up your laundromat? Visit laundroboostmarketing.com and book a call with us for a free consultation.
So that was all about washers.
Yep.
What about dryers? I know there's like a relationship based on how many washers you have, how many dryers. What's your trick there?
Yeah, so this is something I have been able to kind of science out a little bit. So everybody feel free to take this for what it's worth.
You're the only one who says science is a verb.
Whatever.
Science it out.
Yeah, science it out. Math it out. I say that too sometimes.
Yes.
But anyway, so these are some rules that I come up with, and it's really based on the extraction of the washers and how many washers you have. So let's back up for a second. If we use our business model, our demographics, our ideal avatar, and the size of our store, and the layout sometimes matters, of how many washers and where we place them and things like that. We're going to take those rules, and then all we're going to try to do is match our dryer department to our washer department to complement it. Right?
Okay. So like the number of pounds you can wash, you want to be able to dry that same number of pounds?
Well, so
is that what you mean?
Well, that depends on the washers, right?
Okay.
So this is what I mean by that. So there's different extraction speed of washers, right? So there's 100G, there are even below 100G, but let's just use round numbers. 100G washers, 200G washers, and 450G washers. Basically what that means is the extraction speed and how dry the clothes come out after the wash cycle.
Yeah,
right? Before you
I
put
get
them
that.
in the dryer. So a 100G machine would not extract as much water
Yeah.
as a 200G as a 450. And there is a pretty substantial difference between 100 and 200G. 200G and 400G, there is a difference for sure. That's for everybody that's freaking out at home. There is a difference, but we found it to be very minuscule, about 5% when we've tested internally. So here's what I like to do. If your washers are 100G, then your total poundage ratio of washer capacity to dryer capacity should be 1 to 1.2. So if we use round numbers and we say we have a total capacity of 100 or 1,000 pounds of washer capacity, then we would want 1,200 pounds of dryer capacity.
Okay.
Right? And for 200G, we take that down to 1.1. So 1 to 1.1. So that'd be 1,000 to 1,100, right? And then for 450G, what we've learned is you can have about a 1-to-1 ratio because the clothes come out like a lot of people in the industry call the term almost dry. And it's kind of crazy. Because 450G machines, they extract so much water that a lot of customers actually complain. I don't hear people talking about that sell 450G machines, but we have
Why would you complain?
We have some, because they load the washer and walk away, and they come back and they associate clean with water and detergent.
Oh, they think it didn't wash them because they're so dry?
Which is crazy. It's not true. And if they stood there and watched a whole cycle, they would know it's not true. It's not even logical.
So what about the size dryers? Because what do you recommend there?
So there's the poundage to poundage ratio that we just talked about based
that's
on
a total.
Based on the extraction speed. That's one way. The other way to look at it is what I call door to door. So what I like to do there is when it comes to an 80-pound washer, I like to have, I'm going to use the term 80-pound dryer, but it could be a 75-pound dryer or 90-pound dryer depending on the manufacturer. I like to have a 1-to-1 washer to dryer pocket ratio, which is the door of the dryer, right? For 40s to 60s, I like to have a 1 to 2 or 3 ratio, right? So if I have a 40-pound machine, I like to have a minimum or a maximum, if I can, of 2 dryer pockets because people typically going to put 40 pounds of laundry in a 45-pound dryer. If you think about the lines that people put on their dryers, don't load more than 50% full because they have to have room to tumble. You have to take that into consideration. A lot of people think, once again, in that poundage ratio, they just think 40-pound washer, 40-pound dryer, 1-to-1. Well, we typically don't fill up a 45-pound dryer. Where we do fill up a 40-pound washer.
Oh, okay.
So those are little nuances to consider too. And once again, I'm not saying it's half. I'm just saying that's kind of the rule of thumb. And then for top loaders up to 30-pound machines, I like a 1 to 3 or 4 ratio of 30-pound dryer pockets. So, but I want to be clear. I don't do one or the other. I like to take both of these numbers and then find something that's as close as possible to kind of melting the two together. And that's kind of how you determine your dryer capacity ratio. Does that make sense?
Yes. I know something else I've heard you talk about, and you'll have to clarify on this, is with the size of dryers, like not having all big dryers, you need at least a couple small ones.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Why do you recommend that?
Yeah, it's become really common that the 45-pound dryers, and some manufacturers are 50-pound dryers, but that size is the most popular size. And they are, for sure, especially when you think about over 50% of my washers are over 40 pounds, right? That is definitely true. But so one of the things you want to consider here is that everything is relative. Right. So I see people, it's happening every day. They're building $1 million, $2 million laundromats with nothing but 45-pound dryers. And their distributors will tell them, well, if you have 80-pound washers, they can split it in half and put it in a 45-pound dryer, which is technically true, but it's not ideal, right? If you put 80 pounds of laundry in a washer, you typically want to dry it together too in one large capacity dryer, which is why I like that 1-to-1 ratio.
Yeah.
You start splitting it up into the smaller machines. But if you think about it, if you put a whole row of 20, 45-pound stacked dryers on a wall, if a customer walks into your laundromat and they look at your pricing for your dryers compared to your competitors' pricing, the only thing they see is your dryers are X amount, $1 for 20 minutes or whatever they are, right? But they don't have the benefit of relativity. If you put a 30-pound machine next to a 45-pound machine, it makes the 45-pound machine look 50% bigger because it is, right? Most laundromats, especially older laundromats, have 30-pound dryers in them. In fact,
Okay.
most of them have the predominantly 30-pound dryers. So people building new laundromats today, if I walk into not my store, but we have all of them. But if I walk into a store that has only 30-pound dryers and their dryer prices are X, Y, and Z, and I walk into, let's say, Dave's laundromat and he has all 45-pound dryers, the only thing I see is that pricing point. But I had to drive across the street or 2 miles to see the difference. And all I see is your dryers are this price, his dryers are this price. I can't tell that they're 50% bigger, right? If you put, I always say a minimum of 3. If you put a minimum of 3 30-pound stack dryer pockets, which is 6 pockets, next to 45-pound dryers, those 45-pound dryers now have relativity and they look like what they are, which is 50% bigger. And you don't have to explain any of this. This is all the art of building a store, laying out a store. All these little nuances matter. And a lot of people like to insinuate and think that they don't matter. But I'm here to tell you, I mean, we've served millions of customers at this point, not to mention our coaching. And I can tell you that these nuances matter tremendously.
Okay, so we've talked about the machine mix, the size of machines, the ratio of washers to dryers, and the size of the dryers. What about the actual layout? So how do you recommend placing the washers, the dryers? I know you always hear the big ones up front to showcase them as they walk in, but what little tips and tricks can you give our audience about where to place the machines?
Yeah, believe it or not, when it comes to placement, we usually actually do that backwards. So we usually start with the dryers and say, what's the ideal dryer wall? You want an exterior wall where you can get ideal makeup air.
Are dryers always just on one wall together, or do you recommend, because I know, can't people do like, I almost call it like kitting them, which is kind of like the sheet sets or whatever, but like where you have a couple washers and you have a couple dryers together where like basically people can stay in that same little zone. Do you like that, or do you like kind of an all washer area of your store and then a whole dryer area and a whole folding area? Like,
yeah, this is going to sound a little silly to some of you newbies, but this is a very real problem in our industry. So one of the quickest things I learned in the industry 15 years ago is most people that walk into a laundromat are completely overwhelmed. They don't know the difference in a washer and a dryer because
they're all just these silver machines with a circle on front.
That's right. And they're all front load. They at least didn't used to be that way. It really confuses people. So Carla, the labels that I've had you make for our washers, there's a big part of it. That's a big reason why. A lot of people are starting to put similar decals on dryers or putting the dryer fill line and things like that. The reason laundromat owners are doing this is they're trying to solve a problem. The problem is customer confusion. And the bigger it is, the more magnified it is. So for that reason, I really like uniformity. I like the dryers all on one wall, or at least a 90-degree angle, meaning a side wall and a back wall, if possible. I really like your largest capacity washers as close to the front door as possible. And I don't mean a foot inside the door, right? We got to give them room to get in and load the machines and stuff. But we want when people walk in with an 80 pounds or 100 pounds of laundry, do we want to make them walk all the way to the back of the store? They've got 3, 4, 5 bags that they're carrying in. By the way, that's your most profitable machine per square foot. So that's your most ideal avatar, your most profitable customer. You want to make it as easy as possible for them to do laundry with you. And so what I really do when it comes to laying out a store, and whether it's a rectangle or a triangle or a square or whatever, these things all matter if it's long and narrow or long and wide, rectangular wise. All these things kind of factor into where we lay them out. But the general rule of thumb is you start with the dryer department, find an exterior wall where you can easily get fresh makeup air, and that's a big part of it. And then the washers you're going to place in the middle of the store usually. If it's a shotgun, they might be on one wall. But in let's say an average 4,000 to 5,000 square foot store, and you're going to take your largest capacity machines, usually 80s, and you're going to make them your focal point. A lot of times you'll put them on what we call an end cap of a bulkhead. So let's say our 6,000 square foot or our 9,000 square foot store, which is 6,500 of retail space, is pretty much a perfect square for the most part, right? So we have the dryers over on the left-hand side. We have restrooms along the back wall, which it's not as important that they're convenient, right? Storage rooms, things like that along the back wall. We have the counter up front to the right-hand side. And when you walk right inside the front of the store, you have your 4 feature machines, your 4 80-pound machines. And then right behind those on the bulkheads, perpendicular or parallel to the dryers, then you have your 60-pound machines, then you have your 40-pound machines, then you have your 30-pound machines, and then on your least desirable wall, which is the wall all the way, or the side of the bulkhead all the way to the right-hand side, that's where your 30-pound machines and eventually your 20-pound machines are.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So dryers along the outside wall, washers kind of together and clearly labeled. I've even seen some of the laundromats we've been in will hang big signs or banners from the ceiling that will say like the size of the washers or washing zone or whatever and drying zone, trying to make it as clear as possible. So definitely some attractive, some pretty signage to help the customers out.
Yeah, for sure.
Nice.
I mean, we like the labels on the machines, but the ones hanging from the store or hanging from the ceiling or placed on top of the bulkhead, they all kind of do the trick. And the last thing is, a lot of people think you want your dryers as close to your washers as close to your dryers as possible. And you actually don't. You want your washers furthest away from your dryers as possible. And what you want is your folding tables as close to your dryers as possible.
Okay.
So when they load a washer, that's the first thing they're going to do when they walk into a store. Then they're going to load up a laundry cart and they're going to take them to the dryer department. And once they come out of the dryer department, they're not loading clothes from a washer to a folding table. They're loading them from a washer to a dryer. But once they take them out of the dryer, they want to fold them as quickly as possible because they don't want them to get wrinkled. And as I talked about earlier, when they leave a washer department, they typically don't return.
Yeah.
In a dryer department, they go back and forth, back and forth. They go back and forth 100 times because they'll pull 3 pairs of jeans out and then close the door and hit start because they want them to stay warm.
Yeah.
And then they'll take 3 steps this way to the folding table and fold those 3 pairs of jeans, and then they'll go back and grab 6 t-shirts and then they'll fold those. If you watch consumer behavior, that's what people do.
Okay.
That's just
but
how
then
they
they're
do
out
laundry.
of the way of the other people
Yes.
wanting to wash. So it
That's
kind of
right.
clears your washing zone.
Yep.
One other thing that you didn't hit on that I want to mention too, and this is kind of a safety thing, is I don't like the stores where, and we had this at our very, very first store, where you have like a little teeny aisle of maybe like it's only 3 machines deep, and then it ends in a wall,
Yep.
where if you are using those machines, you feel cornered.
Yep.
That's one thing, like, with the shotgun store, you have nice, long, lots of space. Even our big store aisles, you have a way, if you're at a machine, you have a way to escape. You have multiple escape routes. I know that sounds crazy.
No, I mean, if you think of the average laundromat is still to this day unattended, and a lot of them are 24 hours.
And some even in the best neighborhoods.
And a lot of them not in the best neighborhoods. For a safety perspective, that's true. Now, once again, you need to know your business model. If you're going to be in the suburbs of Cincinnati, 30 minutes out, which we are, in a very safe area, then it's less of an issue. If you're going to be fully attended and you're not going to be open 24 hours, those things are still an issue. They're still a good idea to do. So you are definitely right, but they're not necessarily as important. Typically what you're referring to is they'll have kind of a chase come down the wall and then a bulkhead perpendicular to the dryers that comes out. And basically what that is if you have your smaller stores, which is usually 1,000 to 1,500 square foot, there's just not much room in there. And they tend to just be what we call a shotgun, right? So you're going to have your dryers on one wall, washers on the other wall, some folding tables in the middle, and maybe a changer up front and a couple seating units. And that's all the room there is, right? When you get in this middle ground of like, let's call it 2,500 to 4,000 square feet or maybe 3,500 square feet, you tend to have enough space for more washers and dryers than that, but not enough space for multiple bulkheads. Right. And so what we do is a lot of times we run them perpendicular, and it actually is a good use of space. Right.
Yeah,
it really is.
I get it.
But what it does do is creates this cave that you kind of go down in, and you have to come back out the same way you came in. That's not ideal ingress and egress, right? From a safety perspective. It's not ideal, but when you're in that middle ground of laying out a store between, like I said, kind of 1,500 and 2,500, 3,000, 3,500 square foot, a lot of times that does make sense because you want a few more machines in there than just a shotgun store, but there's not enough room to have 2 bulkheads. So a lot of times it does make sense, but it's not ideal. I would agree. If you're thinking of getting into business for yourself, I have something I think you'll find useful. Hi, I'm Dave Menz, owner of the best-selling book, Laundromat Millionaire, The Grit to Elevate an Industry. I've been in the laundromat business for over a decade, and I've grown it from one janky location to 4 high-quality laundromats with over 30 employees on our team. Don't believe me or think I'm just another goofball scheme on the internet? Go ahead, Google my name, Google me, and even check out my podcast, The Laundromat Millionaire Show. Truth is that I get you're skeptical, and I would be too, but hear me out for a second. Back in 2009, I started with about $30,000 in cash, and then I leveraged myself into a multi-million-dollar operation using laundromats as the vehicle. And now I want to share some of the things that I've learned while helping other laundromat owners and expanding my own businesses with you. Looking for a get-rich-quick or passive income business? Well, this isn't the business for you. Looking for a business that is flexible, stable, cash flows well, and is recession resistant and is needed in every community in the country? Then I've got you covered. And what you're looking for is a modernized laundromat. Nope, not just any laundromat, but a modernized laundromat. Just look around in your local neighborhood. Look at the local laundromats around you. It's likely in bad shape, and it's really not serving anyone very well. But it doesn't have to be that way. If you want to learn more about my course and my coaching program, just click on the link for more information. But let me warn you, while the transformation in your community and your life are for real, so is the work. That's right. This is a real business with real investment and real work involved. But man, just imagine how worth it it'll be when you look in the mirror and realize that you're a laundromat millionaire.
So let's transition a little bit away from the machines now, though the number of machines will probably impact this. Carts.
Yep.
So what kind of cart and how many carts is enough carts?
Yeah.
What size? What should they look like?
First of all, this is actually pretty easy. You can't have too many carts as long as they're not in your way. Carts are like parking spaces. You can't have too much parking, right? You can't have too many laundry carts as long as they're not in your way. So the first thing I'll do right off the bat is just say, put as many carts as your store as you can place underneath folding tables, as long as they can get out of the way. We like the single pull carts with the triangles because they can go 90% of the way underneath our folding tables when they're not in use. So there's a place to store them. By the way, a little side tip is if you actually have, depending on the size store, let's say 10% extra carts, but if you have storage in the back or a cavity behind your restrooms or something like that, place them back there. You probably won't need those last 3, 4, 5 carts 80% of the week. But when you do get really busy at peak times on Sunday at 3 o'clock and people start arguing and fighting over carts, you kind of have the surplus of 3 or 4 carts that you can pull out. Another thing that we've gotten away from is we've gotten away from the small carts just altogether, because what we've learned is at one point we had about half small and half large. And what we learned is even the people using the smaller washers would go get the large carts. Well, then you're using an 80-pound machine and you got to go get a small cart and it's all that's available. It creates conflict. If all they have is large carts, then you didn't take the last large cart. You just took the large cart. And hopefully we have a few extras in there.
Yeah.
So there's really not a science or a math sign tied to it. I like to have the single pole racks with the triangles on top. I like to place them underneath the folding tables, and I like to have as many as I have room for a folding table. A 6-foot folding table, we usually hold 2 large capacity carts underneath it. And like I said, it takes up about 90% of the cart, so it's not in the way at all. So it's a good use of space.
Okay. Next up, as we talked about throughput and being comfortable, we talked about seating. This is something when we go into different laundromats, I often see that there is not enough seating. There is often not very comfortable seating. And I always see where there is just seating in like one little area. And as we know, you can't see your laundry from that one little area. So that's kind of a hot button for me, is to have enough seating, have comfortable seating, and to have multiple areas of seating. So what would you say as far as your recommendations for seating in a laundromat?
Well, for one, remember that all of us humans are different sizes, right? And so what's comfortable to one person might be different than what's comfortable to another. So what we like to do is we like to find complementary places. I don't think you should build your store around your seating units. I think your seating unit should be built around your store. But I do think you should leave enough room to have a variety of seating units for different issues. So once again, if you think of our superstore as kind of the ideal situation, you want to leave enough room in the store to have some seating in the back that are more communal, right? They're round and they have seating units that are attached to the floor that they can't easily move. And then you might have other singular seating units that can be moved around the store and sat right in front of a washer or a dryer. You can have leather couches and captain's chairs with USB plugs in them and things like that. You can have bar top tables that, if they have 3 seats next to each other, but they're all facing a wall, 3 individuals that don't know each other and don't want to talk to each other could all sit side by side because they're intentionally faced away from them, right? And then you want to have more communal areas, which are areas that kind of create little groups of seating units that do face each other, right? But really what you want in a perfect ideal situation is you want to have a combination of all these things, and then whatever's taken is taken. It's kind of first come, first serve. But at least they know, the customer knows that you put the thought into that.
Yeah.
Right. So once
variety.
again, you're looking for a variety, and I do want to point out that charging ports are very popular. We're using more electronics today than ever before, and I would recommend putting them everywhere you can.
Let's talk about the folding tables. I know earlier you mentioned about the recommendation of having the 6-foot folding tables instead of the 3-foot folding tables.
Yeah.
My questions are, how many folding tables based on your washers and dryers? And then I know that, so they have the folding tables that are just like one flat surface, or they have the ones that are like a flat surface with a shelf. Do you have recommendations as far as those?
So if you're in a very space-crunched area, the smaller stores or even larger stores that are large capacity in urban areas, the shelves are really nice, right? Because you're going up versus out. You don't have enough room. You can have a 5-foot wide folding table that maybe is only 24 inches deep, which isn't ideal. I like 30 inches deep. But then you can have a 6 or a 9-foot shelf on top.
So as things get folded, you have a place to put them.
Right. You fold things, you set them on the shelf, and then you take them and put them in baskets and things like that. That's not ideal because typically those shelves don't have lips on them. So usually if they back up to each other, then my laundry falls into your laundry kind of thing. Now, if you put them up against the back of a bulkhead or up against a wall, they have a natural lip there, right? So those are things to consider depending on the size of the store. In a perfect world, the number I've settled at is if you just take all your dryer pockets and kind of irregardless of capacity, I like to have one 6-foot wide, 30-inch deep folding table for every 4 dryer pockets at a minimum and 3 at a maximum.
Okay.
Right? Just a general rule of thumb, and that seems to work out pretty well.
Okay. And also, you said they should be near your dryers.
Yep.
Should they be spread in different places in your store or all just near your dryers? I know we like to have 1 or 2 at least near a kids area so you can fold while you're watching your kids. Any other?
That's really the only exception I've ever found.
Okay.
Other than that, I like them as close to the dryers as possible. And that means you're going to drive, when you're laying out a store, you're going to drive your washers a little bit further away.
Okay, so next let's talk about the attendant counter or drop-off counter.
Yeah.
Where should it be placed in relation to your store? And then I see a lot of variety between having just a counter and it's just this open space versus I know we like to have the drop-down kind of security window. Can you talk about where to put it and which type of opening and why?
Yeah, so part of it depends on your business model, but really what I tell people is when it comes to the counter itself, geographically located, it depends on the layout of the store. Once again, if it's real narrow and deep, a lot of times it's going to end up at the back of the store because you just don't have any room at the front of the store. And you have to do what you have to do. But if you're running a professional drop-off service, you really, in a perfect world, don't want your customers to have to walk all the way to the back of the store. In a perfect world, you want to make it right inside the door where they can zip in and zip out. They can get their laundry. You want to kind of serve those customers, but that's not always possible. Sometimes you just got to put it where you want to put it. Another thing is, in a perfect world, you want that counter to be wherever your storage is, right? You don't want to have a counter that's just a closet and you got to keep shuffling the laundry back and forth, clean and dirty, and somebody comes to pick up and you say, 1 second, I'll go get your laundry, and go into another department or another part of the store to get the laundry. You really want them together. And a lot of times that less valuable retail space is in the back corner of the store. So a lot of times you end up putting your counter back there, even though it's not really ideal. But in a perfect world, if you can kind of fit both of those in, that's what you're looking for. When it comes to the open counter versus what I call closed counter or secure counter, I really like the look of an open counter. I think they're beautiful. I think they make you feel more comfortable. You walk up and it's this big open area, and a lot of times they have nice signage behind the counter and they have mosaic tile on the front. I think they look beautiful. But the truth is I find them to be very impractical. And the reason why is every laundromat I build and every laundromat I recommend people build, I recommend you build it so that it can be unattended, and then you attend the store. In a perfect world, that's ideal. And so if you have an open counter that doesn't have any way to roll down and secure it, then you have to be there. You cannot be open as a store and have customers in the store because they can just climb right behind the counter. Right.
Yeah.
Also, even things like the little divots down in them and the scale there that makes it a little bit lower for us to put our laundry on to fold it. One of the things people don't think about is depending on the market that you're in, that's very easy to get to just hop right over that, right? If your counter's up at belly button height, not as easy to hop over from a security standpoint. And so those are things to consider depending on the security of the store. But once again, in a perfect world, having just a 5-foot wide window, 3 foot tall with a roll down door, a lot of times there's not much room for a grown adult to hop through that window, even if they wanted to. The main reason we do it is if you've ever been to any of our workshops or you've ever been coached by me, I talk about redundancies all the time. I like to build a laundromat so that it can be unattended at any time, and then for it to always be fully attended. So a form of redundancy is we have fully attended stores, but one of our redundancies is if a customer or if employee gets sick or they're late to work or something like that, they can always just close the window, put a sign out that says we'll be back in 15 minutes or family emergency, whatever. And what we do is we have 2 alarm systems, one for the front of the store, which is the common area, and a separate alarm for the employee area. They can actually pull down the security door, secure the alarm, and they can leave, and the store can, within seconds, be unattended.
So this allows you to keep the store open and still just close the drop-off
think
counter.
about if you have an emergency in that scenario and the employee has to leave, as an employer, you would typically be like, okay, your husband got in an accident, you have to leave, right? But you have to close the store. But think about it, you probably have customers, right? I have wet clothes in a washer. Are you going to turn off the machine mid-cycle, make me take my clothes out and put my soapy laundry in a bag and kick me out of the store so you can lock the store?
Yeah.
I always say life happens. So what I've always said when it comes to redundancies is always build everything into your business model. This applies to pickup and delivery in every aspect of your business, so that it's not if that happens, it's when that happens. What is the best solution for everyone involved? And we found that to be a really nice compromise.
One thing with that I just want to add is with that window, it isn't as open for your attendants to be able to see the whole store. So how we kind of mitigate that, we do try to position it where they have a good view of the store, but we mitigate that with the security cameras. Basically in our drop-off room, what they can't see, they have a huge TV that basically has squares of the cameras all throughout the store. So even if they can't see through the window everything that's going on in the store, they can still see everything that's going on in the store. So that's kind of how we get around that view issue.
Yep.
Next thing I want to talk about, restrooms.
Yep.
This is honestly becoming kind of a hot topic.
It is.
It is. One, there's Brian Gurrell and his battle against the horrible restrooms of laundromats. He will come and check out your restroom and make sure that it is nice and clean.
And shame you.
And shame you if it's not. But also ADA compliance. I know we've had some friends who've had some lawsuits against them because they have restrooms, but those restrooms are not ADA compliant. So what advice can you give about the placement of restrooms and what those should be like?
Yeah, so when it comes to placements of restrooms, they're just functional, right? If people got to go to the bathroom, they're just going to go wherever they are. Even in a 9,000 square foot store, they don't have a problem walking to the back corner. There's no reason for it to be inconvenient or convenient in that way.
Well, and you kind of want to make it inconvenient for people just dropping in that aren't customers.
That's right. I was just getting ready to say that. I actually like my restrooms in the far back corner of the store because when people walk in, I mean, not that the homeless guy is going to have a problem walking back there, but it gives your attendant more of a chance to catch them.
Yeah,
you walk in the store with no
customers.
Laundry and you dart right to the back. Excuse me, pardon me. Nope, not going to happen, right? Type of thing. So it's the sheriff thing. That's a big part of it. If you're attended, your restroom is usually not as big of a deal if your attendant is properly trained because they're kind of the sheriff and they can, once again, catch the homeless person or whatever.
Well, and one of our stores does have more of a homeless situation there. And we even keep the restroom locked and the attendant has the key. So they have to actually ask for a key. So that's kind of a safety issue there too.
And a lot of times we'll leave the key on the front counter because we kind of know who our customers are and who they aren't. If all of a sudden somebody walks in that looks a little sketchy, we'll just take it and sit it behind the counter. And all they got to do is just come and ask for it, and we can tell them yes or no, right? So that's a way of doing those things. Obviously, another option is being unattended and having a store open 24 hours a day and having the restroom always open. If you've ever done that, you know what you're dealing with there, and there's going to be some things that are out of your control that aren't real fun. But if you're unattended 24 hours, customers and you have a restroom that's open, you're just going to have to deal with those things. And a big part of us going fully attended is us realizing that we couldn't control those things, and that wasn't acceptable to me.
Yeah.
So that was a big part of why we shifted. Also, for some of you that are sitting at home hooting and hollering right now, a few other options are there are actually controls where if you're coin operated, there are devices you can put on your restroom where they have to put a quarter in to open the restroom. Yep. But one of the reasons around that is, it keeps people from coming in and just using them for free. But the funny thing I always find about that is I'm like, if a homeless person has to go to the bathroom, they probably can find a quarter. Right?
Maybe. They might not want to spend it for the bathroom.
But they might not. Yep. So something to consider. I mean, I think it's better than having a free-for-all of 24-hour store, but I don't think it's the best solution. And then if you have a card system, a lot of the card systems actually have a restroom control to them, and you can put it right on the restroom. And you basically have to have a laundry card, which they would need to start their washers and dryers. They need a laundry card, and they just swipe that laundry card, and it doesn't actually take any money off their card, but they have to have a laundry card to open the door. One thing I've learned there, too, is a lot of times homeless people would just come in and find an empty laundry card in the trash, and they keep that, and then they come in and use that to open the restroom. So did you really solve a problem? Probably not. There are more sophisticated card systems out there which you can toggle on a setting where it actually requires a dollar amount on it. Where when they swipe it, it doesn't take anything off, but there has to be a balance on there. So you can't just have a card with zero balance, or you can even set a minimum of $5 or whatever. But when you keep those kind of parameters around it, all of a sudden your customers kind of get frustrated because I walk up and I only have $1 left, but I just started my last dryer and I'm getting ready to leave. I can't use the restroom, right? If you're unattended, you can't let them in anyways, right? Type of thing. So these are some of the tools and resources that are out there that you can use. But in a perfect world, if you want your customers to have great experience, you want to have a beautiful bathroom and really wow your customers, like Brian suggests and like I suggest, usually the best way to do that is by being fully attended. But not everybody can afford that, so I get that too.
So the next thing I want to talk about, and I'm actually going to talk about this one because I have a lot of opinions here, and that is the kids area. So we have 4 different laundromats. The kids areas vary greatly because of the size of the store. Our smallest store does not have a kids area. So instead, what we do have are coloring sheets and suckers and crayons that our attendants can give to kids to help occupy them. We also have TVs that can be switched to like a cartoon station or something like that. But in our 2,400 square foot store, we just don't really have the extra space for a kids area. Where on the other end of the spectrum, our 9,000 square foot has, how big is the kids area there?
I think it's like 15 by 20.
15 by 20 feet. So it's very big. But here are some of the things I've either learned or figured out about kids areas. So they are great if you have room for them, especially when you're catering, if your ideal avatar are those families, because having been a mom, well, I'm still a mom, but now my kids are big. From when my kids were little, it was so wonderful to have a place where they could go and just be happy while I could get other things done. But for those kids area, a couple pointers I have is to not have them near a door where a small child could like run out of the store before you can get to them. Yep. Something we've added, and it's our only kids area with this is we have like a half wall around the kids area in our biggest store. So that way there is only one area that they can enter and exit out of. So like if you're folding and you're, away from the kids area for a minute, the wall's low enough that you can still see in and see your kids, but it keeps them from easily being able to just run amok. They have one little area they can come in or out of. And then the other thing I want to talk about are the types of toys. And this is where we have made mistakes. So in that area, we currently have a kitchen set, and we have a cute little couch that is wonderful, but it's got these baskets of like blocks and little toys underneath of it. And then we have a table. Table's fine. My issue, the kitchen set would be fine, except a kitchen set is worth nothing if you do not have pots and pans and fake food to play with on it. And the little baskets of little blocks and all that kind of stuff, they're wonderful for the kids, but a lot of the kids do not pick up after themselves. And so what ends up happening is your attendants end up constantly picking up the kids area. It easily gets a mess. It's not a quick and easy cleanup. So if I were to do that kids area over, which we will eventually get to, it's not number one on our priority list yet, but I'm sure you've seen them in some doctor's offices and stuff like that, or even at the mall. Some of those built-in, where they're not movable, but they're like a built-in wall type thing, or built-in tables where they have little things kids can slide and turn. And I would do more of those, more things where it's less little pieces that can go everywhere and also get taken with them quite often. One thing I do love about our kids areas, though, is we're free take a book. If you can get a subscription to Scholastic, and they have where they deliver you some books every month, and that has been fabulous. And we put a sign up above it, and all the people in the community, if their kid loves a book, they are free to take a book with them, and that encourages kind of reading in your area as well. But those are some of my feelings on the kids area. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, there's not a whole lot to add to that. The only thing I'll say is just, kids area or no kids area in general. Once again, what's your business model? Who's your ideal avatar? We have a ton of families that come to our superstore, and they love a lot of things about it. But if you ask mom, the number one thing she'll tell you is that kids area. We have customers that drive past 2 or 3 of our other stores that either don't have a kids area or have not as nice of a kids area to come there, because it's worth a 30-minute drive to drive to that store. And once they get there, their kids are happy and occupied. In our case, we cater to families. We want families to come in our store. We want the kids to feel welcome to come with mom. We want the kids to tell mom they want to come to Queen City Laundry. So that is a part of our business model, but it depends on the size of your store and things like that. So yeah, very powerful stuff. A couple last things before we let you go today, just little one-off kind of ancillary things. The storage of your store. Once again, I'm going to go back to the beginning of the episode, Carla, and I'm going to tell them about their business model. And I'm going to say, what's your business model? A general rule of thumb that I like to use is if you're trying to build a substantial, and you can decide for yourself what that word means, but a substantial drop-off laundry or pickup and delivery service, then I like to have at least a third of your store be storage. If that's a big part of your business model, the days of just having a closet with a broom and a mop sink in it are over if you plan on running a drop-off laundry pickup and delivery service.
So we have covered a ton, and we are out of time. But hopefully you got a lot from this episode. I know it was pretty meaty, but hopefully it's got you thinking maybe about your store layout and some adjustments you can make, or made you dream about the perfect layout of that store you may someday build. So that is our hope here, but that is all we have for today. So be sure to check out our website for more information. If you're interested in coaching from Dave, or you're interested in our workshop, or even just becoming a member of our community and having those monthly Q&As with us. There's a lot of opportunities on our website, so be sure to check that out at laundromatmillionaire.com. But that's it for today. So thank you for watching the Laundromat Millionaire Show, brought to you by HM Company Drain Troughs at draintroths.com. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Take care, everyone.